prog rock next on Retro Serial. Hey everyone, welcome to Retro Serial. I'm your host, ENC. On today's program, we have back with us Chris from Redbeard Videos to talk about a genre of music that I am not very familiar with. He's going to be educating us for the most part. We're going to be talking about prog rock, and we're going to be talking about what the definition of it is, its origins, and why geeks are so attracted to the genre. But before we get into today's episode, would you do me the honor of liking this video, hitting that subscribe button, and go ahead and share it on your favorite social media. Yeah, that would mean the world to us here. Those are free ways for you to support the show. If you want to go a step further, hit that bell notification. That way you don't miss a single episode. Also, you can follow the link below to our Patreon page where you'll find 2 levels of support. Yes, 2 levels of support. There is the Cornflake Club, which is just $3 a month, telling us, hey, we like what you're doing over at Retro Serial. Keep it up. We want more Retro Serial. But if you want to be on the Insiders Club, you got to join that Honeycomb Hideout. It's $5 a month, in which you receive most all podcasts and most all videos at least 1 day in advance, at least advanced enough that you could say, hey, I got to hear it or see it before you all did. So if you want to do that, please head on over there. And there's a new way to support us, and that's through Venmo, because a lot of times people want to say, hey, I don't want $3 or $5 taken out of my account every single month. But you want to make a one-time donation, where you're welcome to make it at Venmo, and it is at Singularity_Productions, and that will also be linked in the description box below. With that all said, let's just get straight into the interview. All right. Well, hey, everyone. We are back again with Chris from his... I already messed it up. I'm going to keep it up again. From Redbeard Videos.
Yes.
Yeah. And you know,
Beard of Reg.
The Beard of Red Videos. And I've already done an introduction to this podcast, so you know what it's about, but I feel kind of like it needs to be said, and that is, but I'll keep it brief, and that is, we are going to be talking about prog rock, its origins, some of the most famous bands, their contribution, as well as maybe some of the more controversial subjects within the genre. This is actually something that I've actually wanted to do for a while. I think when I first contacted you and you told me about prog rock, it was a subgenre of music that I was actually unaware of, which is unusual for me. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's tons and tons of music, so maybe it's not as unusual as I think, but I was unaware, and I actually thought that prog rock was some type of Eastern European thing. I thought it was like
Czechoslovakian rock.
Yeah, I thought it, because like over there's like a lot of heavy metal, like a lot of thrash kind of metal going on. We're gonna kind of let the conversation go where it, you know, naturally where it leads as well. Chris, I'm really glad you could be back on with us again.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on. I actually, you kind of didn't contact me, and it was perfect because I actually went on like a 2-month hiatus from the channel, and I just relaunched my season 2 weeks ago, and it's a slow roll. It's kind of like hitting the reset button, but I decided to kind of reorder things, and it's going well. You hit me up at the right time, so it's always good to be back.
That's really good. And then plus the idea too, like, my channel is about growing up Generation X, and I only have so many days in the week, so it's just like I can't, like I want to do one on music, then I want to do one on TV, then I want to do one on movies, and then one, and it just kind of gets, a little, things get away from me, and it was like a while before I realized, hey, I haven't done anything on music for a while. Like I just been kind of overwhelmed with like just this and that, like last week we did one on snacks, like growing up Generation X and our favorite snacks and stuff.
Fun dip.
Yeah.
Never even thought of that one.
What's that?
I never even thought of the fun dip. Although I was a gobstopper man. Remember the gobstoppers?
Well, not to get off topic, but like, what do? Do you do you save the dipstick for all the sugar, or do you get like 3 licks in and then just bite the dipstick? Because the dipstick was like the best part.
True.
I did that. I actually did, dipped it in and then would suck the sugar off a couple times and then, bite.
And you're like crunch.
Yeah, crunch.
And then you get the rest with your
and
finger.
then you drink. Yeah, and then you drink the sugar, and then you're done.
Yeah.
So also, just in case your audience doesn't know, and I don't know if you remember, but like I was also known before Redbeard Videos. My former career was I am also known as Chris the Progtologist because I did a radio show since 2007 called Progtology 101, which I have since abandoned over the past year or so. I think the last one I did was about a year ago, but it was on many, many platforms over the years, started at Sirius Satellite Radio, and then it just kind of went from there. So, and then it became my own. So
that's
awesome. So this is why I specialize in the progressive music milieu, if you would.
Thrash Pondo, I'm glad you could be joining us as well. How are you?
I am relatively not unwell, thank you.
Relatively not unwell is better than absolutely horrible.
What are you, George Carlin?
I knew someone would get that. Thank you for.
I'm not unwell, thank you. I'm relatively neato. I don't remember what George Carlin album that is on. I'm actually related to George Carlin.
Get out of town.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am. Yeah, I am. He was he's my dad's first cousin.
No kidding.
What?
Yeah.
Small world.
Okay. Oh. Now this whole thing, this podcast should become about how you are related to George Carlin and how that has not come up until right now.
Right now.
Like, what the hell?
No, actually, I think I've mentioned it before
We did a show on Gen X comedians and you didn't bring that up.
No, I think I did.
I would wager money you did not.
Really? Okay.
I wager money you did not.
It's like the time that I was in a cover band for a year and a half with a group of guys and a girl. And then I didn't know until 18 months into being in the band that our bassist was the president of DreamWorks Animation. Like I just didn't know. Like I didn't pay attention. Yeah. He's like,
that's another great story. That's a good one right there too.
He's like, why don't you come up to my office one day? We'll hash out some stuff. Just me. Like, we'll hash out some some new songs. I'm like, all right, cool. Where's your office? He's like, the DreamWorks building? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, it's in there. I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm thinking I'm walking into like some little office inside No, I go up there and like, oh wow. I'm like, oh wow. Who are you? Are you Walt Disney?
I'm Michael Eisner.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, we all have stories.
Right.
But anyway.
Well, let's start with the I want to know your personal history in prog rock. Like, how did you get involved in it? What was the first kind of bands that you listened to that made you interested in the genre, and go from there? What's your story with prog rock? Then we'll talk about the prog rock story, but I want to know your story with prog rock.
So it's kind of a twofold thing. Like, before I even realized that I was like into prog rock, like my 2 favorite bands, like when I was growing up, were Kiss and Queen. Okay. Mm-hmm. And of course, like, Queen is not very much considered, like, because their hits aren't necessarily progressive. But if you listen to their music and their catalog as a whole, they're an incredibly progressive band. Especially their first 2 albums, their first 3 albums actually are very progressive before you start getting into the We Will Rock Yous and the We Are the Champions and all of that stuff. The stuff prior to that is very, very early progressive metal almost. Mm-hmm. And then one of the other bands that was always cropping up in my youth was Rush. Now, these bands inherently are interesting because when you're talking about progressive, like, roots, like progressive rock, like, the first thing you need to realize is that progressive rock, when we were young, was not a thing. They didn't call it progressive rock until later, like until into the 80s or even the late 70s. So, like, I mean, when we were kids, it was called progressive rock, but like, I'm talking about like when it was first came out, like when Yes first came out, or when Genesis first came out, like these bands that are widely regarded as the beginning of prog, King Crimson and all of that. They weren't calling it prog rock. They were just calling it like artsy rock or album rock. Like, that's what this stuff was called, Pink Floyd, stuff like that. So when you think of those bands, early Pink Floyd, yes, which with their 16 minutes, opuses and things like that, and King Crimson with their really opaque sounding music and, really long pieces, and even like a Frank Zappa and stuff like that. When you pick out Queen and Rush as your first introduction to prog music, it's actually kind of it's almost like an entry level drug, because unless you're digging deep into Rush, like Caress of Steel, their third album, which has some really like heavily progressive, crazy stuff. But like that was buried material. That stuff was not popular. That's only popular amongst Rush fans. Like only Rush fans know Caress of Steel, okay? Or even the Fly By Night album. Like they know the song Fly By Night, but they don't know By Torn the Snow Dog. They don't know songs like that, which are like the 8-minute opuses. So they don't know that. But Rush is the perfect example of a gateway drug into prog music, because when you listen to a song like Tom Sawyer, or you listen to a song like Spirit of Radio or Free Will, even, like they sound like regular rock songs, but they're just not. They're progressive, like just in their very nature.
They're innovative. They're
not only innovative, but they do things in their songs like with time signatures, with chord progressions, with lyrical content and everything, like everything that they do. So that's why when you talk about my introduction, it's weird, because my favorite bands were Kiss. Styx is another one. Styx is another inherently progressive band, but they have these hits that are not, like Blue Collar Man is not necessarily a progressive song, but if you look deeper into the Pieces of Eight album, you got songs like Lord of the Rings, Queen of Spades, Pieces of Eight itself, the title track. There are very progressive songs. So they come off as straight rock, but they're just not. They're also very progressive bands. So I almost had the Crystal Light version of prog introductions, if there ever was one. Right. It wasn't until I was a teenager and and I was introduced. And again, I stuck to the progressive light for a long time. Queensryche was one of my next favorite bands that came along, where they are very progressive at times in their early career, up through like concept albums like Operation Mindcrime and
Operation
stuff like that.
Mindcrime was one of my all-time favorite albums at the time.
Right. Very
at that
progressive.
Time, I
very
would
progressive.
Just continually listen to that album. I mean,
very progressive in its nature. Very progressive in its nature.
Progressive, I'm thinking, if I'm picking up on what you're saying, it's rock music, but it's rock music that kind of has an experimental attitude with it. Is that kind of like what defines it? Like they're not afraid to experiment with things or
So progressive in and of itself, just the word progressive means to progress something, right? So Queensryche as a whole is more of a progressive band than they are like in their music. So for example, I don't know how deep you dive into Queensryche, but Queensryche, every album is different.
Yeah.
They don't stay the same ever. Like literally, if you go from Warning to Rage for Order in order, like they're similar, but then after that, it goes off the rails. Operation Mindcrime is way different than the first two albums, way different. And then Empire is even more different. And Empire
even looked different.
Right. And Empire's got a more radio-friendly feel to it. But again, you have 8-minute epics like Anybody Listening, or you have Adela Brown, which is another 8-minute song. Another Rainy Night, which was kind of a quasi-hit radio song, still very progressive type of song. And Silent Lucidity, for like a ballad, still not your typical like run-of-the-mill.
It's not Every Rose Has Its Thorn.
No, but it's more than that. It's so much deeper.
No, it's better.
Orchestration. It's got orchestration, and it's got like, there's just it's a different time signature. It's not a 4. I don't think it's a typical 4/4 song. I might be wrong on that. Don't quote me on that, but I feel like it's got a different time signature. It's not even your typical 4/4 ballad. But and then you go even further. The next album after that, Promised Land, which was way off the rails compared. So Queensryche is like, if you bookend their career as a very progressive band, they progressed their sound as they moved along. Rush was the same way. Rush went from almost a Led Zeppelin-esque sound in their first 3 albums to 2112, which was the whole first side of the album was a 20-minute song, which blew everybody's mind and said, wow, this is insane. And they went completely progressive rock for those 3 albums there up to Farewell to Kings. And then they broke off and got into the keyboards with Tom Sawyer and Spirit of Radio and all that stuff. And then in the 80s, they almost went full keyboards and even got like, they even towed the line for jazz fusion for an album or 2. And then they came back in the 90s with more of an alt rock sound and got real heavy again. So they just continued to push the line all the time. Progressive rock as a whole is just, it's basically something that like, it's a very broad umbrella. Like it's a very big thing. Like, you know, there's always a constant argument when you talk about progressive metal that Iron Maiden is the perfect example of something that will divide a room like that. Will divide a room. Half the room will be like, they're a progressive metal band. And the other half will be like, no, they're just a regular metal band, but they have progressive elements. You know, when you can pull out Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner and it's a 13-minute song.
That's one of those things. It's like, for me, I liken it to food. So like we all know what like Mexican food is, like a burrito. But let's say I have a burrito and someone just happens to say, you know what? I know it's weird, but I like marinara sauce on my burrito. Is it still a burrito or is it something different now? And you say, well, okay, essentially it's still a burrito, but it's changed to a degree. But then you could add to it. Well, you know, I like the burrito, but I like putting spaghetti inside of it too. And then you're like, you know what I mean? Like, okay, it's changed so much that we're no longer quite talking about Mexican food anymore. It just, they can only handle so many changes. And I know that with bands too, like you're talking about Iron Maiden. Okay. How many elements of progression can you add to it before it stops becoming a metal band and then starts becoming a progressive rock band? And I remember too, as a kid, Chris, I remember not knowing where to put certain bands like Rush. You know, you would see, I didn't consider Rush to be a heavy metal band, but you would see them on occasion on Headbangers Ball.
They're very much always brought up in the discussion of the infancy of progressive metal. Like they're like the grandfathers of progressive metal, mostly because of their very, very early work.
Is there a difference between progressive rock and progressive metal?
Well, I mean, what's the difference between rock and metal? I mean, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the difference. Like, so you wouldn't, you know, like, again, Queensryche is another one. Is Queensryche a metal band or a rock band?
Yeah.
Like, what are they? You know, I would term them a metal band, but I would absolutely listen to a conversation of someone saying, well, you know, since Operation Mindcrime, they're more of a rock band than they are a metal band. So, you know, I don't know. Like I was just having this discussion with one of my older sons about, you know, the difference between hardcore music and post-hardcore music. You know, there's no finite, in my opinion, there is no finite description of things. And progressive music, progressive rock and progressive metal is the most bewildering one when it comes to this. I got into a whole, like, I ostracized myself at a progressive rock festival back in 2013.
You were controversial, and
I was.
I can't believe this, Chris.
So
I find that rather difficult to believe.
Well, this is the story. There's a progressive rock festival called Rozfest, which is the Rite of Spring Festival. And it happens every year around this time, usually like end of March, early April. And it used to take place in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Now I believe they've moved it down to Florida. And it's never been anything special. They've never gotten any of the really huge names, except for this one particular year. They got a whole lineup of bands that I was in love with. So I'm like, I have to go to this thing. And this is when I was living in California. And there were bands like, you know, I don't know how many bands you know, but there was like Motar and The Incredible Jolly. The only band that you might know is like Shadow Gallery was one of the bands, and Riverside was another one, and the Flower Kings. Those were like the big bands, you know, like that were in our genre, our prog genre. And so I went there, and I love all these bands. Pain of Salvation was another one. And so I'm standing outside in between bands, and I hear just these, and I call them, you know, I'm a prog fan. I'm a prog rock fan, but there is a faction of Prog fans who I will call cork sniffing Prog fans, because they are, if it's not Genesis, King Crimson, or Yes, it's not Prog music. Like in their ears, it just doesn't. And it's to me, that defeats the entire word progressive. Like it's antithetical to the entire like genre. So
it's like a square circle.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, yeah.
Right. So it drives me nuts. So I'm out there and I hear these people talking. Yeah, this, Pain of Salvation had just finished. Now, Pain of Salvation is from Sweden. They're a prog metal / prog rock band. They kind of tread the line. They're one of those bands too. One of the greatest singers you've ever heard in your life. His name is Daniel Gildenlow. If you ever want to hear an amazing singer, check out Pain of Salvation. They're absolutely ridiculous. However, they just finished playing. I go out there and I'm listening to these guys play and talk, and they're like, I don't even understand why these bands are here. They're not even progressive bands. And I'm like, well, what? Like, I was like, you talking about Pain of Salvation? And they're like, well, yeah, that band was barely I'm like, are you high? Like, what are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, this is ridiculous. The only band here that deserves to be here is like the Flower Kings. And of course, the Flower Kings sounds like Yes. Like, that's what they sound like. And they're phenomenal. I love the Flower Kings. Got into a whole big thing with them. They're like Porcupine Tree's not even progressive. Dream Theater is barely progressive. I'm like, are you high? Like, what is wrong with these people that they would set back our genre so much and reset the clock? So this argument took on such a life of its own on my own show and online that I had an interview with Steven Wilson, who is from Porcupine Tree, and he's a big progressive music artist. So I'm giving you big names here. These are big names in our genre. And I interviewed Steven Wilson like a week later, and I asked him, like, I talked to him about this. And in short, he basically said, I don't care about those people. If I was trying to sell records to those people, I would sell less than 100. He's like, these people are ridiculous and they don't understand what progressive music is. And that's just what it is. So yeah, I was very ostracizing at that festival. It was insane. So there's a faction of people who believe progressive music should sound like just one thing, which is completely ridiculous. Like, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
It stops.
It doesn't make sense to me.
It puts up a wall basically, and then
right.
You don't get past it. I'm going to get into the origins for a second, but as I'm and you're listening to somebody, I'm somebody who knows nothing about this genre at all. You're throwing out band names that I'm not even close to familiar with. Of course, some of the more popular ones. Start taking notes
and start listening to them. You'll enjoy them.
Okay. But I want to get into the origins of it, but I do want to throw something out a little bit, because I see this band as you're talking. I'm thinking of a band that might have opened the door. It might be like even a prototype. And that is, and I don't know if you even thought of it, you may have, this may be a whole discussion within prog rock. So I won't keep you in suspense any longer, but I think maybe the Doors would fit into something like that. They have like a long extended solo. They were, in the hippie movement, but they were ostracized from the hippie movement. And they would do these things that I mean, as you're talking, that I would consider to kind of be progressive, where they would like, again, they would have like these long extended times of music and stuff like that. And then he would do poetry in the middle of his songs rather
He'd drop his pants in the middle of a concert.
Yeah. Stuff like that. But I mean, I just think that that maybe that they could have been like the a prototype of them.
So that's not a bad observation. They would definitely go under the like a proto prog or like a psychedelic thing. So there was a faction, because this is where this is where my opinion comes in strong. So like on a lot of lists of like the greatest prog rock albums or prog rock bands of all time, you'll get Pink Floyd thrown out a lot. Like you'll get that thrown around a lot. And
are you of the opinion that Pink Floyd is a prog rock band? I'm
going to put it out there. And I know when we have the question and answer session, when this comes up, I'm sure I'm going to get slapped back about this. But like, to me, like Led Zeppelin's more of a prog band than Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd was psychedelic.
Yeah, that's how I classified them.
And Pink Floyd very much like delved into more of an atmospheric thing, which is kind of on the prog scale, but God, they're on the outside of the umbrella. Like they're right on the outside that I would have a hard time putting them like fully in. And I feel the same way about the Doors, even though the Doors, one of their labels would be proto prog. So you nailed that. That's definitely on the scale. But see,
they're too far outside of it.
No, I wouldn't say too far. I would just say I don't mind hearing Pink Floyd, the Doors, giving credit for being part of the movement or enhancing the movement, but like to have them be near the top, because the Doors and Pink Floyd are such legendary bands. If you put them solidly in this category, who do you put above them?
Yeah.
Other than maybe Rush.
I wouldn't say. I mean, I obviously would not say that the Doors is a prog band. I mean, I wasn't trying to suggest that, but what I was trying
I'm not saying you are.
Yeah, what I was trying to suggest is that they did some prog elements. They were being progressive in their day for sure. They were progressing past the hippie movement and trying to do some things that were just unheard of,
to me, a band that's more in the vein of maybe the Doors, but definitely sounds more progressive to me or feels more progressive would be like Cream. See, Cream used to like Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce, and the way that they played with rhythmic stuff, and the way that they, Ginger Baker would come with like the African beats and the jazz fusion type stuff that he would come with, and the off time signatures. Now the Doors, and like even like like the most famous long song of all time is Inagata Davida, which is not a prog song by any stretch, and Iron Butterfly is not a prog band,
right?
But like that one song is hella long. Like that's a very long song, and that is definitely a qualifier for what makes a band or a song progressive, is having it be long.
This would be something that I would be interested in. So let me throw this out too. I would be interested in that original group of where we could pin prog rock, where we could say, okay, this is prog rock. What their influences were. Did they say, you know what, I like that element of the Doors, or I like that element, and then combine that into something that would be interesting to hear. Or if they didn't, you know what I mean? Like, so maybe we can steer the conversation. So take us to the first elements of prog, and then maybe even discuss who were these guys listening to.
I mean, this is such an obnoxious answer.
Okay.
But it all goes back to the Beatles when it's all said and done. Like if you look at what they came from, yes, and where they started, and then you start getting into albums like Revolver and the White Album, like the White Album specifically. If you take the White Album for 1 second, you got a super ultra pop song like Happy Birthday, for just a happy birthday,
right?
And then you have a poppy rock song like Back in the USSR. And then you're going into something like Happiness is a Warm Gun, which treads the line between, almost like dark and dirty sounding rock music. And then there's blues guitar solos. And then they have this like doo-wop chorus in the middle. Like they switch genres like 2-3 times in that one song. And then you have, in my mind, Helter Skelter, which might be the first true metal song that we've ever heard. You also have Revolution, which has that kind of, the beginning of that song is a very metallic sounding song. Mm-hmm. You have so many different things that go on that one album alone. And then you hop across to Sgt. Pepper's, which is a concept album, and then they're getting into being different characters, and like I think it all begins and ends with the Beatles. When it's all said, it all starts there, not begins and ends. It all starts with what the Beatles were doing. If you want to pinpoint certain like aspects, like there were other bands that took what like the Beatles did and then expanded on it.
Hang
like
on one
Genesis.
Second. Let's. I think Thrash. Did you want to say something about the Beatles
dude.
there?
Oh no, I just wanted to say it's so funny because as you know, I've been listening to you give the origins, and the one band I kept coming back to that just seemed to fit the template was the Beatles. So I'm so relieved that you went with the Beatles, because that was the exact sort of a trend I was leaning towards. So again, don't think you were phoning in that answer. I think that was actually, I don't see how you could give a different answer. I think you're right. I think it all started with them. Now it went in several directions afterwards, but I think they were the ones who basically, they were the prime movers, I think you'd say.
Yeah, and of course they're a different band from when they came over here, you know, from I Want to Hold Your Hand to, you know, Let It Be. I mean, we're talking night and day different. If you were an alien and you came to this earth and I gave you both of those albums, you would not think that that was the same band. Like,
right. Other than the voices, that's like the only thing that holds up. But,
right.
And then you go from there. And of course, like, you know, I can point to, you know, Frank Zappa, who was around the same time as the Beatles, and he delved more into like the art rock side of things and playing with the jazz fusion and being more spontaneous and less contrived in what he would do. And then you look at like Yes, who would write like pop type songs and harmonies similar to the Beatles, but then they would whip out, you know, 17, 23-minute songs where, and Rick Wakeman just doing all kinds of craziness on the keyboards and all that. So Yes, and Genesis was another one where they would add in an element of theatricality to it when you have things like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and stuff like that. What was the other one? Supper's Ready was another one. And Peter Gabriel doing his antics and the things that he would do on stage in terms of his presentation and his voice. So
was that common? Was that common for them? Like, just to break there, because I just had a thought. No, for prog rock, for the live shows, did they soup it up for live shows too? Was it, I mean,
I think Genesis was the first to do something like that in terms of, I mean, look, you can give like makeup and stage theatrics and stage presentation credit to a few different places. Alice Cooper did it. You know, Elvis with the way that he would present stuff on stage and do his thing. Genesis was definitely one of the first, with Peter Gabriel wearing either a flower. He was either dressed as a flower, he'd come out dressed as an alien, he shaved his head like just right in the middle here. Like, it was just, he would do some wild things. And then of course Kiss, which just brought it over the top. Like, they brought New York Dolls was another one. Like, they would come out in drag and all that stuff. So you can point back, but it wasn't specifically to prog rock. As a matter of fact, with Yes, Rick Wakeman would come out with like a cape on. He was like the wizard, like that was his thing, you know. But like Rush never did that, you know. Rush was horribly dressed. Actually, like they had no idea. Rush kind of took a different direction when they wound up getting money, and they wound up being big enough that Rush would take the stage show, and then take what Kiss did with their explosions and stuff like that, and their big, like, you know, the big lights.
Yeah.
And then Rush took it to another level. And they were one of the first bands, I think, that ever did like the big screens. And they would add like movies and stuff to what they would do. Pink Floyd was also one of the first. Pink Floyd.
With Amagama, yes.
Well, yeah, well, not just that. One of the most fascinating live things I've ever seen on video. And this just goes to show how much of a dick Roger Waters is. But like, he so hated the fans that during the Wall tour, he decided to put a wall up in front of the stage.
Oh, wow.
And then they would knock down the wall. Like, during the show, it would just periodically, they would take parts of the wall down. Mm-hmm. But he hated he hated the fans so much that, you know.
Really?
So yeah.
That's
so
horrible.
Prog guys are super eccentric. I mean, Robert Fripp from King Crimson would sit behind the amp because he didn't like people. Like, so Prog people are super eccentric. Even coming all the way down to today, like bands like Dillinger Escape Plan, like they were ape shit. Like, they were they're absolutely nuts. So but that's getting more modern.
So well, speaking of modern, let's work our way now from like this. Let's work our way into the 80s. You know, I think I got a general idea of the 70s kind of stuff. What happens in the 80s? Is there any steps forward with prog rock? Is there anything that's built upon? Is the name actually finally being used?
Well, so yeah, yes. but also the 80s is weird because when I think of 80s bands, again, I wasn't around during the 80s, and I have to be honest, like I seem to focus all of my attention on the 70s and the 90s forward. The 80s was, I mean, other than Rush, Queensryche, Fates Warning, and like King's X, those were like the only bands that really.
Was King's X Prog? Would they be considered?
Their early stuff was definitely Prague up until about Dogman, and then they kind of went a little more just song oriented. I mean, their stuff is, again, they're another band that I could make the claim is inherently progressive. So like they just sound progressive to me, but there are people out there that are very definition driven. So if you go by definition, King's X hasn't been progressive in quite some time, but to me, a lot of their music is. So
I remember that was one of those bands that I didn't really know what to do with. They would come on like the Headbangers Ball, and I'm like, this is an interesting band. They have an interesting sound. I don't really know how to peg them. I couldn't really peg them alternative, or anything like that. But
usually when you can't put a band in a slot, that's usually a sign that you may have a progressive band on your hands.
It's like
because that's usually the way it goes.
Go ahead,
there's a lot of bands.
Oh, I will grant you, Chris, I was a child of the 80s, and I will grant you, it seemed to me music peaked in the 70s, if you ask me. And the 80s, I wouldn't say they were simply riding the crest on that, but it was almost like people weren't really sure where to go. I mean, when you've achieved perfection, now what do you do? Music in the 80s also suffered quite a bit from, and I think we've talked about this before, the upsurgence of music television. Music became more of a visual than an audio entertainment. So the bands that were getting all the airplay were the ones who did these very, I don't even want to say progressive, but very advanced, very polished music videos, which were getting all the airtime on MTV. And a lot of the bands that were actually making good music were kind of getting relegated to the wayside. So, the 80s were some great music came out in the 80s, but it seemed to have suffered from unfavorable circumstances. And so I can certainly understand why you would suddenly skip to the 90s, which was also a very good decade for music.
I don't mean I skip it in terms of, I love the music of the 80s, and I do. And
me too.
The more you're saying that, like, I start thinking along the lines of, there were bands that kind of, first off, one of the things that definitely happened is, like, you have bands like Styx and bands like Journey and even bands like Yes. Like, Yes was still around, and Rush was still around, and Styx was still around, and Journey, but they all went more radio friendly. Like, they all went radio friendly. There were other bands like Toto, which Toto was a crazy progressive band, but the songs that they're known for are very, very commercial. Like, they're very commercial songs. Yeah, Rosanna, Africa. These are like, but Hold the Line to this very day is a drum beat that is so involved that people, like drum teachers, are trying to teach it to their students for years and years and years. So these are bands that are progressive in nature, but they're not known for being that way. Also, on top of that, you could make the argument, and I would listen to it, that a lot of these new wave bands, The Art of Noise, Talking Heads, Devo, even to a degree, but not so much Devo. Devo was kind of, but like Talking Heads is the perfect example of a band that was doing very progressive and interesting things musically, but it got a different label, and the label was New Wave. They're a new wave band. That's what they are. So they got cherry picked from our progressive thing, and they moved on to something else. So, and maybe they don't fit the definition. And I think that's where it comes into play. Some people, and they don't sound like a progressive band to me, even though if I analyze their music, I can go, yeah, that's kind of out there. Like, that stuff's kind of out there, what they're doing, like, so.
Well, they were part of the early punk group movement too. They were they were part of the CBGB, people. They play alongside the Ramones and things like that.
Right.
Take Jefferson Airplane, who was a very innovative band in its day with White Rabbit and Someone to Love and some really, really great hits. And what was their big top 40 song in the 80s? We built this
We
city
built
on
this
Rocky
city,
Road.
and nothing's gonna stop us now.
I won that.
Yeah.
I won that album. I did. I won it. I won it on the radio station. I got called in. I was the right caller, and I got that album. That was
Wow. That's a grand day for your life.
I still have it somewhere.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah,
And it's a win. Put it in the win column.
a win's a win. I had a friend who was into hardcore rap, and he won a Richard Marx album, CD, a Richard Marx CD. Seriously, like they had to name a song, and he called up and named the song. They're like, "You won the Richard Marx CD," and this is a guy who's listening to NWA and it's like that. Like, okay, thanks. I guess
Very
I
nice.
need a doorstop.
And then also like there are other bands that, again, like another artist like I don't know, Peter Gabriel had huge hits in the 80s.
Yeah,
And he was a progressive. I mean, Sledgehammer is a progressive song.
Mhm.
Like
I love
it sounds
the
like
song
a,
Sledgehammer.
but I mean
love
it sounds like a pop song to us because it was so popular.
Yeah,
But that's
and-
a progressive song. That's a progressive rock song. If you ever really listen to it and break it down, you're like, yeah, that's some heavy shit that's going on in that song. Like there's nothing regular about that song.
No, very
You know?
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And In Your
So-
Eyes, of course, one of the all-time iconic scenes from the 80s is John Cusack holding up the boom box playing In Your Eyes.
There you go. Yeah.
Peter Gabriel. Oh,
Uh-oh.
No, we're all good. Just I got the low battery warning. We're all good.
oh, okay.
I got 20%. We're fine.
20%. All right.
We're gonna make it. We're good.
All right. Well, if you drop out, you drop out.
No, I have a newish phone. We're good.
All right. Okay. Let's move into the 90s then. I kind of want to move there next. I mean, you said you kind of skipped the 80s to a degree, but I mean, as we're talking about it, you're bringing more stuff up from the 80s, but
Yeah, it's almost like I had
Let's-
to jog my memory, but yeah.
was there a renewed interest in prog rock because of the rise of alternative rock? Do you think?
No.
Okay.
Actually, it almost I think it was the thing with progressive rock and progressive metal is that it's always relegated to nerd status, and it's always been kind of kicked down, and it just kind of hangs below. Like it was the 90s where Dream Theater popped up. That's when they showed up, and they had one big hit, Pull Me Under, which literally came out of nowhere. Nobody saw it coming. Here's this 8-minute song, which they had to somehow edit a 5-minute version of for the radio. And they got this video that they filmed in like one take. Like they just did it from a live show or whatever. And Dream Theater, if you know anything about them, they are like all virtuosos. Like if there's a band out there right now, other than their singer, because their singer has fallen on hard times because he's old, he's older. So he's not at the top of his game. But at one time, when that guy was at his peak, all 5 guys are the best at what they do. Best bassist, best drummer, best guitarist, best keyboardist, best singer, period. Across the board as individuals. And they'd write 8 to 15 minute songs on a regular basis. These guys, and they've carved themselves a 30-year career, 35-year career now, basically on one song. Like they built their fan base on one song, and then they just kept plugging away. And now they play 3,000 seat theaters across the country every album cycle. And I don't even love their newest album. I think their newest album was awful. But like, I'm a huge fan of the band. They've just fallen off. So I don't think progressive
I don't
metal.
think. Let me amend that. Let me amend that. I'm not saying that progressive rock got popular.
Well, I'm
just
going to
saying-
get to something that's interesting because,
Okay.
and I was just about to get there, because there is an interesting band that came out of the 90s that is a prog metal band, but not a lot of people will say that and be like, or they definitely didn't say it in the 90s, and that was Tulle. Tulle is a full-throated, full-blown, from the gate prog metal, prog rock band. If there's ever been one, there's just from the very beginning. Maybe not with the Opiate EP, but from their first major release, which was Undertow, all the way through their career, they are a progressive band, period, without question. Just in their sound, in their nature, in their time signatures and the songs that they write and their lyrical content and everything that they do, they are a progressive band. That's just what they are. And
why do you think that prog rock is relegated to nerds, as you were saying? What is it about their music that attracts nerds, and why do nerds listen to prog rock?
For a long time, like when you like, let's go back to the 70s bands that I was talking about. And, you know, you have Genesis, who would talk about, you know, dragons and fairies and all kinds of stuff. And even Rush at the beginning would talk about like, you know, space, you know, like their first big breakthrough album was 2112, which was basically a concept album based on Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. And it was basically about a bunch of priests who took over a world and, you know, got rid of all music. And, you know, and it was just this space rock opera thing. And it was just, and that's what it was. And that was their big thing. And Yes would do the same type of thing. And they would all come out in their robes or in their, you know, in their capes and whatever. And it was very nerdy. It's what it was. It was just very nerdy. And then in the 80s, you know,
so a guy in his basement playing Dungeons and Dragons would have obviously been drawn to Yes.
Absolutely. Without question. And then even when you get into the 80s, a lot of the progressive music was heavily drenched in keyboards and stuff like that. And that wasn't crunchy. That wasn't rock and roll. It wasn't party, man. It was, you know, and it wasn't like, you know, Don't Stop Believing keyboards. It was like that whooshy, like spaceship sounding shit. The beep, like, you know, and people go, oh, wow, that's so fun and you're nerdy shit. So
I could see too. Let me add this. And I think Thrash wanted to say something too. I can see that, you know, pretty much happening. I mean, really, if you look at like mainstream metal of all its varieties, it did appeal to people who, you know, it was about like being the guy who could score with the most women and you know, the guy who was the strongest and the best. It was the guy who could rule the world kind of a thing. And there's a whole collection of people who are, you know, stuck in their mother's basement and stuff like that. And are more interested in Lord of the Rings and more interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. So I can see that would, you know, create a division there. But I want to ask a question, and I'm probably going to forget it. But Thrash, I wanted to say something, I think.
Well, just when you were discussing the nerd angle, one of the things I've noticed now, let's take, for example, Blue Oyster Cult. One of their songs, more progressive songs, Veterans of a Psychic War, that comes right out of a Michael Moorcock novel. We are the veterans of 1,000 psychic wars. It seems to me let's face facts. Science fiction is the genre of the nerd. And it seems, since progressive rock, in many cases, seems to have been very heavily influenced, for whatever reason, by science fiction, I think it was just made for the music nerd, if you follow me. So I can certainly see that connection.
Sure. No, and then like even like with Pink Floyd, and even though Pink, you know, Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall were like two of the biggest albums on the face of the planet forever and ever, but you know, it's still kind of nerd shit when it's like when it's all said and done. You know?
Right.
It's like
right.
So
let me ask you this question though. I do want to ask you this, and that is, there was another genre of music that exploded, another genre of music that people who were losers or not popular got their day in the sun. And that was in alternative rock. You know, it was basically, we're not rich. We don't wear leather jeans. We wear ripped up jeans and stuff like that. That type of music that I'm very much associated with, alt rock music, became popular in the 90s. And it was okay to be stuck in your mother's basement playing D&D, or not be a jock, or, you know what I mean? But why do you think that exploded in popularity, but progressive rocks tended to not explode in popularity?
Well, again, like, so alt rock, that comes down to simple, like, sound and music and mathematics almost. Like Dream Theater struck a certain chord with their one song. But then like if you listen to the rest of the album that it came from, it's going to take a certain fan to really enjoy the rest of that album, because it is inherently progressive. It's drenched in keyboards, and playing a guitar and shredding a guitar is one thing, and John Petrucci is one of the greatest guitarists on the face of this earth. However, listening to a keyboard player who plays his keyboard as fast and as well as the guitarist, that's not nearly as cool. Like it is for musicians.
For a musician, it seems
right. For musicians, we look at it and we
go,
"Holy shit, that's amazing!" But like for regular people, it's kind of off-putting. So then, if you come around and you find the one progressive band that really made not only a career, but like a headlining festivals across the world career, like Tulle. See, Tulle not only had progressive elements to their songs, and they do pull out 8 and 9 minute songs, but they had an aggression and an anger, and their lyrics spoke to people, and it was different. So they broke the progressive mold. And then that's why going forward, I'm just gonna jump off here and go into the 2000s. If you go into the 2000s, progressive music and progressive bands started to pop up a little bit more and make a little more noise. Like a Coheed and Cambria became somewhat popular because they also were more aggressive and more and dealing more in life lyrics, things that spoke to people more, as opposed to, and the thing with Coheed and Cambria that was so brilliant is that their entire existence was a concept album. Every album was a concept album. Coheed and Cambria were names of characters in their story. Like, so it was the name of the band and it was the name of 2 characters in their story. So it was like they took the nerd shit but put it on a human level, and people were like, and they made comic books to go with their music. Like, so they kind of packaged their whole shit in order to become popular. Like, it was just, and I don't think they did it that way to become popular. I just think it worked for them, and it's just how it happened. They had 1 or 2 songs that hit public consciousness, and before you knew it, there they were. And they play headlining spots at festivals and stuff now, and they are kind of a bigger band now. So
do you know that song by Rush called Working Man?
Yes.
Do you know what the general population calls that song?
A song about Cleveland?
No, they call it they call it Not Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
I think the average person should be saying, I think that's what they think. They think, oh, here's another song by them that's not Tom Sawyer, but it does tend to, there does tend to be the one song from a lot of these, like you're talking about Dream Theater, that I even listened to Dream Theater because of the aforementioned song. Now, I never bought the album, but I had friends who were listening to Dream Theater, you know what I mean? I'd come over and listen, but yeah, this is pretty good and this is good stuff. I didn't ever really buy into the album or anything like that, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, particularly their musicianship.
But I mean, there are bands now that have figured out how to be, and it might be because we're more palatable as a society now to different types of music than we were, and we have progressed as a society in terms of musically. Bands like Muse are like this generation's Rush, in my opinion. The thing that makes Rush and Muse so interesting to me in terms of being as progressive as they are, but also being accessible, is that you can listen to this stuff and not even pay attention to how technical the things are that are happening, and still enjoy the song and tap your foot to it. And then, like, if you were a musician, you'd listen to it and go, how do these people not hear what's going on here? Whereas Dream Theater just puts it right out there. Like, they don't even hide the fact that they're playing an 11/8. Like, they don't care. They're just like, well, whatever, whereas Rush will do, the song Spirit of Radio sounds like the most basic rock song there is, but it's not. Like, if you break it down as a musician, it's one of the most complex songs ever written. And yet regular people listen to that and go,
right,
as if it's just a regular song, and it's bizarre. You can't do that to a Dream Theater song. There were other huge bands that came out of the 2000s, like System of a Down is a progressive metal band that have hit huge in the 2000s, like gigantic, like they headline festivals. And I watched them and I go, these guys are playing Middle Eastern, Greek, and American music together.
Yeah.
And they're doing it in 9/8. What? Like what?
Interesting.
The Primus is another one. Primus is one that came out of the 90s, actually.
Yeah, Primus.
And they're a prog band, you know. So
I was working in a kitchen, surprisingly, as everybody knows. I worked in a kitchen for a lot of years, and and they were playing they were playing that band, and I brought in the Pixies, and nobody in that place had heard the Pixies, and they were like, is it like this band? And I'm like, well, you'll just have to see. I said they're both pretty weird. You know what I mean?
But
they're
no.
not. They're like, yeah, and they all hated it. They hated the Pixies and wanted to listen to Primus. So they was like, no, we want to listen to Primus. I mean, and I liked Primus. One of the bands that I was in, the guy who was the main songwriter that I kind of put up with at first.
They're all dicks, aren't they?
Well,
was he a guitarist? They're difficult to deal with.
He was an excellent guitarist and an excellent bassist, and I think
they usually are.
And I think he was more into prog than he really was into alternative.
It's just more stories for a different day.
Yeah, but he was really into Primus and Rush and things like that. And I was, at the time, I was just kind of coming out of heavy metal, so I was more into like alternative rock, and Nirvana and Nine Inch Nails were like my two favorite bands back then. And as a result, I started listening to the Pixies and things like that, you know. But no, what he was a terrible lyricist. I mean, his lyrics were like, you know, a 5-year-old could have written them. Seriously, I'm not joking. And I couldn't sing them. I couldn't. We were always fighting. So I'd change his lyrics, and he'd be mad, but he wouldn't know that I would change them because I would just sing on stage, and he's paying attention to what he's doing. But I just couldn't deal with his.
I could see how this goes.
Oh yeah, they kicked me out.
God, I hate bands so much. I wish I was good at all the instruments so I could just not have a band.
Well, I just play it all on the on the thing. They got their old, which was interesting because the old guy that they got back was he sounded like he was really, really trying to sound like Eddie Vedder. He moved away.
Her.
Yeah, the tomorrow. Yeah, he tried to really
like that for a whole day.
Pretty good, actually.
Heard of no her, no.
Yeah, the Jarl. The Jarl. Where I was sounding more like Sebastian, even though we were into the 90s, I was sounding more like Sebastian Bach.
Hey, mother trucker.
Yeah. Outside my window, there's a whole lot of trouble.
Mother trucker. Did I ever tell you that I DJ'd that dude's wedding?
Who? Sebastian
Bach.
You DJ'd Sebastian Bach's wedding?
I DJ'd his at a place called the Rock Bar in San Jose, California. I DJ'd his bachelor party, and then the very next day was his wedding, and I DJ'd his wedding party as well.
Oh wow,
that's awesome. Cool squared.
He is an interesting dude. I've never met him.
He's an interesting dude. He
lives in his own world.
He asked me to spin a lot of Rush.
Oh, he did.
Wanted me to play a lot of Rush during his wedding. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, what's the future for prog rock, and what do you want to see? Well, I mean, what would you like to see?
What do I want to see? I want to see Dream Theater retire.
Why? Or do you want to?
Their last album was dog shit. I hate to say it. It hurts me so bad. But like, no, in all seriousness, I don't want to raise the ire of the Dream Theater crowd if you happen to get those people, because they're awful. Like, they're just the worst. They're like, they gatekeep their band so bad. Like, it's the worst. Basically, I don't know. Like right now, I like a lot of what's happening. Like, there are bands that aren't, I don't know if I have discussions with people all the time about bands like Dance Gavin Dance, for example, and they have progressive elements. A lot of their stuff is very like technical and, you know, involved. They have a screaming vocalist. They have an amazing singer. And they're just a very interesting band. And their stuff is progressive in its nature in terms of the time signature play, and the guitar work is super technical. I love what they do. and I hope that they're on a very like good, like steady upward trajectory. And I hope that they bring stuff to prominence. Other bands that have already been popular, like Avenged Sevenfold is a perfect example. Not a progressive band for the majority of their career. However, throughout their career, they've had elements. And then their last album, The Stage, was quite progressive, like a lot of progressive stuff on there. So I'm interested to see what they come up with, because if they go and put out a really stellar progressive metal album following their last, stellar, mostly progressive album, and they're a top tier metal band, like they're almost like, there's Metallica, Slipknot, and then like Avenged Sevenfold kind of lingers on that third level, right? They're like top of the line. Gojira is up there. They're a borderline progressive band. Opeth is now, they're fully progressive rock band, and they are renowned across the world. So there's a lot of exciting things happening in the progressive realm.
Okay.
That, Porcupine Tree's putting out a new album this year, which ought to be interesting, because they're a band that has been gone for the better part of a decade. So that'll be interesting. And then there's always amazing guys. Like there's like guys that are so highly respected, but they're kind of on the underground, like Devin Townsend. Devin Townsend's one of the greatest songwriters, one of the greatest singers you'll ever hear. In like you're a singer, listen, check out Devin Townsend.
Okay.
If you haven't heard him before, the dude's voice is just off the charts good. Like he's perfection, and his songwriting is out there and wacky. I could even send you songs of where to start if you don't want to get into the real wacky shit. Like you stumble into some wacky stuff and you'll go, what am I listening to? Like what did Chris put me on to? Like, I'll send you some normal stuff. And then like Coheed and Cambria's got a new album coming out this year. And, but the be all end all of prog metal bands right now, in my opinion, is Between the Buried and Me. Like they are they carry the torch, and they're not the most popular, but when I say they carry the torch, they are like if you want to know what the best sounding prog metal is going right now, that's going to offer you everything that prog metal has to offer. I think BT-BAM, Between the Buried and Me, is the place to check it out. Like that is the band. If anybody listening is looking for that, they're heavy. They do highly technical pieces. They also, they bring softer stuff. They bring heavier stuff. They write big magnum opus type pieces. They do everything,
Right.
If you're looking for the more accessible prog stuff, Coheed and Cambria, Dance Gavin Dance, even a Periphery. Monuments just put out a new album like yesterday or like this past week. And Primus is coming out with new stuff too. Actually, they actually just put out a new song this week, and they put out another song last week. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. There's so much music going on right now that, I just think in general, for all genres, not just prog, but for all genres, music is just, music is popping. Another thing, just to get off the prog metal for 1 second.
Okay.
Another band I'd like to bring up as a borderline prog, but more on the pop side, would be 21 Pilots. They're another band that does so much outside the box of convention that they are an interesting case study for a band that can be labeled kind of progressive at times, for a band that does hard rock at times, hip hop at others. They play Tyler Joseph is a multi-instrumentalist who does a lot of things. And I wouldn't put them in line with Rush and exalt them to a progressive band. But when you're looking for a pop artist that might also offer some musical technicality that you wouldn't expect, 21 Pilots is definitely one of those bands.
Interesting. Very interesting. All right. Got the toughest question for you. And that is desert island time. You're
Rush.
stuck on an island. No,
Rush.
Not 5 albums. 5 albums, not 5 discographies. 5 albums.
So you're looking for me to pick the 5 definitive prog albums that'll.
I'm asking you. No, I'm not. I'm asking you your personal taste. If you were stuck on a desert island and you could bring 5 prog rock albums, what would be those albums?
So I'm going to cheat on one of these, and I'm going to say Rush Different Stages, because it's a triple disc live album that has like a bunch of songs. So that'll cover the entirety of their career and have me satiated for that. What Queensryche album would I pick? Queen 2 would definitely be on that list. So Queen 2. Dream Theater. It's another live album. Live Scenes from a Memory, which is a double disc, but it's got a fair amount of their career on it. So that's a good one. Wow, this is hard. Two more. I gotta look at my list here. I gotta look at the list. But I want to pick a.
I couldn't even. I would ask you to, Thrash, but I mean, dude, I wouldn't even know. I wouldn't.
Well, what I was going to do is I was going to throw out 5 albums out there and see which ones Chris think would qualify.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, we can do that. We can do that too. But
okay, sure.
Let me just.
Oh, you finish up, please.
I'll just throw 2 more out there as 2 of my favorites, and I'll just say, geez.
You have the right to change your mind.
Sticks, Pieces of 8 would be one of them as well. And I'll promote my latest video, System of a Down, Toxicity. There you go.
Okay, right on.
That's my latest video. Is I looked at perfect album, and I picked Toxicity by System of a Down, and that's over at Redbeard Videos now.
Right on.
So what were you gonna say there? Fresh?
Okay. Well, a couple of them I know qualify. Well, you had me at Queen 2. Queen 2 is one of my favorite albums of all time. Has been for 40 years. Just an amazing album.
Mr. Fairy Fellers, that's that album. That song is just insane. And March of the Black Queen is one of my all-time favorite songs.
I love that song. I just like the concept. You know, the whole Black Queen, White Queen. Love it.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine in high school actually wrote a stage play based on that one album. It wasn't very good, but
do you know that Freddie Mercury wrote the entire Black Side by himself, like note for note, everything. Like everything is all him.
I did not know that. I know he was the creative genius behind it. I didn't know he did everything.
No, well, just for the Black Side. The White Side was the other guys, but the Black Side was all him. So
that's I believe it. That's amazing. And of course, I got to go with the Beatles' White Album. It's always on my list.
That's a good one.
That's 2. Blue Oyster Cult, Fire of Unknown Origin. Would you?
Blue Oyster Cult's an interesting one because they're another band that treads the line of, they do some psychedelic stuff, they do some hard rock stuff, and they have their progressive moments. So I don't know if I would solidly put that. They like them, and like Jethro Tull is another band that like I don't know how to categorize those bands. Like they fit the definitions, but they don't sound progressive to me. Like it's just
fair enough.
It's one of those things. So
okay, so we'll call that one a no. Pink Floyd, The Wall.
Yeah, I think it's inherently progressive. As much as I hate putting Pink Floyd in that category,
it's one of my favorite albums of all time.
Yeah, it's a great album. It really is.
Yeah.
And the last one, and you're probably going to fight me on this, but I think they were very progressive for any number of reasons. They Might Be Giants, Flood.
You know, I don't know enough about They Might Be Giants, other than the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse song and Constantinople. Like those are like the 2 reasons I know that band. But and a very good friend of mine is a fan of them. I know they're good musicians. I'm honestly going to pass on answering that one way or the other because I really don't know enough about it. So I don't want to be. I don't want to strike down a band that deserves to be hailed. So
right.
Fair enough.
I know they're good. I know they're good musicians because they write music for everything, like literally everything: commercials, TV, pop music, whatever. I've heard them everywhere. I just never listened to their like deep cuts to really be able to. But I will now. Now that you've mentioned it, I will actually go check it out. So,
all right. Well, we got to wrap this up before Chris's phone dies totally. And stick with us here. Hey, everyone. I just want to thank you for listening or watching this episode of Retro Serial. You know what to do. go to Thrash Pondo's YouTube page, subscribe. Go to Chris's YouTube page and subscribe. I will be leaving the links in the show notes below. If you are interested in supporting us, the best thing that you can do is like, comment, subscribe, and share. That's free to you for you to do. If you want to go that extra step and help me grow this YouTube mogul empire, you're welcome to donate on my Patreon page. There are 2 levels of donation. There's the Cornflake Club, which is just $3 a month. It's like, hey, we like what you're doing, keep it up, thank you. And then there's the Insiders Club, which is the Honeycomb Hideout. In the Honeycomb Hideout, you get most all videos and podcasts at least one day in advance. And then there's also the Venmo. We just opened that up. So Venmo will be in the description box below as well. It's if you want to make like a one-time donation, you don't want $3 or $5 continually coming out of your account, which I totally understand. It's at Singularity_Productions, at Singularity_Productions. So those are ways that you can give back, but really the best way is let's just get me up over that 1,000 mark and share it on your favorite social media. So that's the best way right there. All right, everyone. I want to thank you for listening to this. I want to thank you, Thrash, for being here. And I want to thank you, Chris, as well.
Definitely.
We'll be seeing you in a week on the live show. So that, you can answer questions and we'll be reading comments and things like that. So if
see this right here, I never leave this space ever. Like I literally just sit here waiting for you to get back to me. So
I was hoping that would be the case. I was like, it's like when you see your teacher outside school, like, what are you doing? If I see you outside the studio, I'm like, what? You've got a life?
Good times.
All right, everyone. Take care. Stay retro.